public health crisis posed by COVID-19, and in light of the recommendations from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to avoid gatherings of more than 10 people, today's meetings are being held virtual through a teleconference. An audio broadcast of these meetings with video of the presentation live streamed from the Port Authority's website. We're now convening our public session of the Committee on Finance, which will be chaired by Commissioner Bagger. We will conclude the public portion of today's meeting with the public board meeting. Also, in lieu of a formal presentation, I've directed staff to post presentations on capital performance results to the Port Authority website. Let's begin the meeting with a hearing from our Commissioner Bagger on finance. Rich?
Great. Thank you, Chairman O'Toole. Today's meeting of the Committee on Finance is being held in public session. The committee met in executive session earlier today to discuss matters relating to ongoing negotiations or reviews of contracts or proposals. The committee also met jointly with the Audit Committee in executive session earlier today to discuss matters related to ongoing negotiations or reviews of contract proposals, matters related to the lease of real property where disclosure would affect the value thereof or the public interest, and matters involving public safety. At this point, I'd ask our board secretary to advise us of the composition of the Committee on Finance today and confirm that we have no recusals.
Committee on Finance is composed of Commissioner Bagger, the committee chair, Commissioner Eves, the committee vice chair, and Commissioners Horwitz, McCabe, and Pacino. All committee members will be participating in today's meeting via teleconference. There are no recusals required.
Great, thank you. In consistent with our long-standing practice, at the end of each calendar quarter or shortly following the end of each calendar quarter at a public meeting of the Board of Commissioners, our Chief Financial Officer presents the financial results for the prior quarter. So I'm pleased to introduce our Chief Financial Officer, Libby McCarthy, to present the 2020 first quarter financial results. Libby?
Thank you, Commissioner. Jim, if you wouldn't mind, we'll go to slide 2. So this slide on the screen, it's our regular disclosure regarding this condensed quarterly unaudited financial information. We do provide this for information, but suggest that readers can best understand this information when read in conjunction with notes and schedules for our annual financial statements, which are available on the website. Moving now to operations. Net operating income for the 3-month period ended March 31st, 2020 totaled $496 million, which is 1.3% higher than 2019 actuals, and is $25 million, or nearly 5% below 2019 amounts. This lower than planned performance against is entirely attributable to the impacts of COVID-19 on agency operations beginning in March, which I will discuss in more detail shortly. After consideration of non-cash depreciation, income from operations totaled $132 million, which is $16 million year-over-year decrease, attributable to higher depreciation expense due to an aggregate of over $3.6 billion of capital construction projects being placed into service in 2019 and the first quarter of 2020. In total, the agency's net position or equity of $16.6 billion increased $116 million compared to year-end 2019. Now moving to gross operating revenues. Gross operating revenues for the 3-month period of $1.3 billion increased $28 million, or 2% over 2019 levels. Tolls and fares increased $14 million, primarily as a result of the scheduled tolling rate increases in Agency 6 bridges and tunnels, which became effective January 1st, 2020, and high volumes in January and February of this year. These increases are partially offset by decreased vehicular activity and path riders volumes starting in March, which again I'll discuss shortly. Aviation fees, which provide for recovery of certain capital investments and operating expenses, increased $14 million, primarily due to the recovery of increased policing and security costs particularly for LaGuardia redevelopment traffic mitigation and the recovery of additional aeronautical capital investments that were placed into service. Rentals increased $9 million as compared to 2019, driven by scheduled rent increases at aviation facilities, in addition to scheduled rent increases and increased occupancy at One World Trade Center. These fixed rental increases were partially offset by decreased percentage rentals, primarily at aviation facilities, as a result of lower activity in March resulting from the COVID-19 travel restrictions. The catch-all parking and other category of miscellaneous revenue sources decreased $8 million as compared to 2019, primarily as a result of lower passenger parking at aviation facilities in March, again due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. So now let's turn to those activity at our facilities. The impact on our results of the COVID-19 related travel restrictions become clearer. These charts show our activity volumes in two distinct periods. First, they show our year-over-year activity growth for the first 2 months of the year, which are prior to any significant adverse impacts of COVID-19. You can see activity was generally higher across our facility. The charts also show year-over-year activity volumes for the month of March, which is when we begin to see activity volumes sharply decline. It is important to note that these March numbers are the aggregate for the month, not the end of the month. So to provide some references to where we stand today, comparing average weekday volumes for the week of March 30th to the average weekday volumes for the month of March 2019, TD&T traffic is down about 60%, and aviation and passenger activities are both down about 95%. This level of volume decrease has continued through April. How long these depressed activity levels will continue is dependent on when and how travel restrictions in the region are phased out. I do want to note that truck volume at our bridges and tunnels are proving to be more resilient than automotive, bus, and vehicular volumes as truck continues to move essential goods throughout the region, and you can see that on the right-hand side of this chart. This next chart just aggregates the activity across the entire quarter, and what the impact combined of that March substantial decrease in activity did to the full quarter. So now let me move to operating expenses. For the 3 months of 2020, operating expenses grew $22 million or 3%. Employee expenses, excluding snow and ice, increased $30 million, primarily due to increases in police officers who graduated from 2 Port Authority Police Department classes in the last 8 months, and as a result of general employee expense increases. Contract service payments to third parties, excluding snow and ice, increased $20 million, primarily related to increased tunnel and bridge Easy Pass processing fees due to higher Easy Pass utilization, and increased World Trade Center operation and maintenance expense due to scheduled increases in contractor billing rates and increased building services at World Trade Center, resulting from increased occupancy. These increases were partially offset by decreased snow and ice and utility expenses of $29 million in the quarter, driven by milder weather, leading to fewer snow and ice removal activities and decreased heating costs. From a cash flow perspective, this performance resulted in positive cash flow. Here you can see at March 31st, we had cash and investments totaling $3.7 billion. And the quarter showed a $322 million cash flow from operations. Capital funds and available commercial paper that support our capital program totaled over $600 million, consisting of capital funds of approximately $387 million and commercial paper availability of $230 million. And our days cash on hand at the end of the quarter was 100 days. Finally, our bonds and other financing obligations at March 31st, 2020 totaled $23.9 billion, which is in line with the year-end 2019 levels. With that, Mr. Chairman, I conclude my remarks and would be happy to take.
Great, thank you, Libby. Are there any comments or questions from members of the board? If not, Libby, I'd like to thank you and your team for that report and all of the underlying work that it represents, and to let people know that in accordance with our usual practice, the presentation that we just reviewed will be made available to the public on the Port Authority's website. Mr. Chairman, that concludes today's meeting of the Committee on Finance.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Bagger. Moving ahead, the board meeting of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey and its component units is now being called to order. I'd like to repeat the statement I made previously for those who are just joining us now. Due to the ongoing public health crisis posed by COVID-19 and in light of the recommendations from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention to avoid gatherings of more than 10 people, today's meeting is virtual via teleconference with audio being live streamed from the Port Authority's website. On April 6th, the Audit Committee and Committee on Finance met jointly in executive session. Earlier today, the Committees on Finance met in both public and executive session. The Committees on Finance and the Audit Committee met jointly in executive session. Their reports will be filed with the official minutes of today's board meeting. The Commissioners also met today in an executive session earlier to discuss matters involving ongoing negotiations or reviews of contracts or proposals, matters related to the lease of real property where disclosure would affect the value thereof or the public interest, matters related to the personnel procedures, and matters involving public safety or law enforcement. I now request that our Executive Director, Rick Cotton, provide his report, which will include an update on the agency's response to COVID, including details of how we are maintaining safe operations. Rick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the last month, as the region reached the apex of the coronavirus spread, Port Authority employees have worked with great dedication and commitment to keep all of our facilities open and operating. We recognize that our facilities enable essential employees to get to and from their jobs, to sustain critical supply lines, and to reassure the public of the region's resilience. The importance of the continued operation of our facilities could not be higher at this moment, and the dedication of staff in keeping our facilities open and operating has been truly extraordinary. I would like to thank publicly the Port Authority staff, both our union represented staff and our non-represented staff, for their hard work and continued commitment at this very, very difficult time. I would also like to express appreciation to the leadership of the 23 unions representing Port Authority and PATH employees for their cooperation and support in working with us to respond to this crisis and to put measures in place to keep workers safe. Let me turn to our operating volumes, some of which were discussed by our CFO. During this period, our operating volumes have plunged to levels that we have not seen before. At our airports, passenger volumes at Port Authority airports have decreased by more than 95%, frequently to 97% of their prior volumes, which have been traditional at this time of year. At PATH's average weekday ridership has decreased to 95% of what it was during this comparable period a year ago. At the bridges and tunnels, the vehicular traffic is down by 60%. Truck volumes are down somewhat, importantly less than that, demonstrating the resilience of our supply line. At the port, cargo volumes at the seaport have decreased less than at the airports at PATH and bridges and tunnels. March cargo volumes decreased by 22% compared to March 2019, Now, due to the resumption of factory production in China, we expect cargo volumes at the seaport to be down significantly less for the month of April, though we do not yet have final figures. May volumes and beyond are likely to be significantly influenced by regional demand, given widespread closures of retail shops. With respect to operating adjustments at the Port Authority, in line of declines in passenger activity, staff has worked to shrink the operating footprint at our facilities to improve efficiency in our operations, our maintenance, our cleaning, and our security activity. While doing so, however, facilities have implemented operating changes to ensure that customers are able to use our facilities while they are keeping a safe social distance. At our airport, the agency has coordinated closely with the airlines, with TSA, and with CBP to consolidate operations at various terminals and concourse. At LaGuardia, flights have been consolidated into gates and fewer concourses. At JFK, Delta has consolidated its Terminal 2 flights into Terminal 4 gates. Flights from Terminal 7 have been consolidated into Terminal 8. At Newark, Terminals A and B have also consolidated flight operations into fewer concourses. At the Midtown Bus Terminal, the agency has worked with bus carriers to consolidate operations in line with decreasing passenger volumes there. The bus terminal has experienced 95% decline in riders and passengers using the bus terminal. All operations in the South Wing lower level have been relocated to the North Wing. Portions of service have been suspended on the South Wing's 4th floor, and the related passenger areas are temporarily closed. At PATH, the agency has reduced the frequency of service given the 95% drop in ridership. PATH schedule adjustments were and are designed to achieve two objectives. Number one, to provide reliable service for essential employees, and two, to ensure adequate capacity for social distancing in train cars. In support of both objectives, service remains more frequent during the morning peak. PATH staff consistently monitor both in-person and via staff's camera coverage coming into its command center, platforms and cars, or adherence to social distancing guidelines. PATH has begun to regularly share photos on social media of trains and stations during peak hours, and PATH is prepared to take immediate action to address any social distancing issues that arise. The front car on all trains used by our engineers and conductors is now set aside as a safety measure for train crew. At the Oculus World Trade Center Transit Hub, some entrances and exits have been closed, and entrance is now consolidated into fewer entrances and exits. Now, there are limits to how far facility footprints can be reduced while preserving necessary operational capacity, and we believe we are very close to that level, but facilities continue to look for additional ways to work smart. Let me turn to address the impact of COVID-19 on our workforce. As of this morning, just under 200 Port Authority employees have reported positive test results for COVID-19. That is from the very beginning of the crisis. Almost half of those who reported positive have now fully recovered and returned to work. The rest primarily remain in quarantine as they recover or are hospitalized. Many more employees have been tested with negative findings. In terms of self-quarantining, our total number of employees who are currently on self-quarantine is 354, down from a high of 700 2 to 3 weeks ago. 1,300 employees who at one point or another were quarantined have now returned to service. Virtually all of our employees who have tested positive have experienced mild to moderate symptoms and are recovering. In our latest report, As I said, 4 employees are, however, hospitalized, and the agency is committed to ensuring that all who have tested positive get the medical attention they need. Tragically, 2 employees have died from the virus. 1 administrative employee who was working remotely, and 1 employee, a longtime employee who worked in one of our maintenance shops. Our thoughts and prayers are with the employee's family. With respect to measures that we have taken to protect the health and safety of our employees, we continue to regard them as of paramount importance, and we are highly focused on measures to assure the safety of the agency's workforce. Every Port Authority employee whose duties allow is now working remotely. Close to 3,000 employees. We have put in staggered shifts. The schedules of essential workers have been altered and staggered to allow them to arrive at work at different times and to maximize social distancing while ensuring coverage of necessary work. Some essential staff with key skills or experience are rotating their duty times and locations to ensure that we always have staff available with requisite skills in the case that someone in one group tests positive, and others who have been in contact with that person are required to enter precautionary quarantine. In accordance with recent emergency orders from New York and New Jersey, all essential employees who have any degree of contact with the public are being provided with appropriate face coverings and required to wear them in Port Authority facilities at all times. We have tried to address both the health and the mental health of our employees. We have waived all out-of-pocket expenses for testing and treatment related to the coronavirus. And in addition, the Port Authority has made available free and confidential mental health counseling to all Port Authority employees through our Employee Assistance Program. With respect to our construction project, construction continues on the Port Authority's essential infrastructure projects with a heightened emphasis on keeping workers safe and healthy. The Port Authority's engineering department, by its construction management division, has created a coronavirus safety checklist for resident engineers and safety inspectors to use during daily worksite inspections for all the Port Authority's essential construction projects. This checklist has been shared with all contractors and is updated to ensure adherence to the latest guidelines from the federal government, from New York, and from New Jersey. The Chief Financial Officer just reported on our first quarter 2020 results. The headline, as she said, was that financial performance in January and February was extremely strong. March, however, showed significant adverse impacts from the COVID-19 crisis, and those impacts will be felt going forward depending upon how the region recovers. I would take one moment to note that in the last several weeks, credit agencies have updated their ratings of Port Authority financial instruments. As the board knows, both Moody's and S&P reaffirmed the existing ratings for the agency's consolidated bond and commercial paper. That is a good thing. Both did, however, change the outlook for Port Authority revenue bonds to negative from stable, as the rating agencies have done for many, if not most, agencies in the transportation sector. With respect to federal support, the Port Authority has received some initial financial assistance from the federal government through the CARES Act, and we will be seeking further support in future federal stimulus legislation. The Port Authority secured approximately $450 million in federal CARES Act funding related to our airport. This amount, however, may not cover the revenue losses the Port Authority is currently experiencing at its airport. With respect to the future, the Port Authority will be seeking further support from the federal government to avoid potentially significant cuts to our capital plan. The agency is reaching out to senior elected officials to discuss the potential of further legislative development. With that, Mr. Chairman, I conclude my report.
Thank you very much, Rick. Any comments or questions from the commissioners? All right, let me just add a couple things, Rick. 2 months ago, this virus crisis pandemic came upon us, and frankly, I don't think any of us knew what March would bring, and certainly at our March meeting, I don't think any of us could have predicted what April would bring. And here we are in April, and I feel, Rick, under your leadership, we have stabilized, we have a plan, and given the numbers you have just told us in terms of the safety and security of our employees, the plan seems to be working. Let's talk to the employees first, as we did last time, Rick. The employees that are out there working frontline, we can't thank you enough. We know when you're leaving your household and you're saying goodbye to your husband or your wife or your kids, that it is tough. And when decisions are being made here, we have that in mind. And as Rick, the executive director, our leader, has said, your health and safety is of paramount concern to us. And again, you stepping out the door, putting on your overalls, putting on your uniforms, and working on behalf of the port to make sure that the roadways and the aviation ways and the port are open for business, for commerce, for medical supplies, for personnel, is holding this region together, and we can't thank you enough. And to the senior staff that has been called upon and over again, helping coordinate that with our executive director, we thank you for your sacrifice and your dedication. The Port Authority has been called to serve. The Port Authority has been tested, as it has in the past 99 years, and it has, in my estimation, answered that call. As the executive director noted, there have been two individuals in particular that have passed away due to the coronavirus that have been employees, and to their families, we have a heartfelt condolences. Sharon James, a 16-year veteran of the engineering department who worked from remote, she passed away and left us on April 7th. We are so sympathetic to her, Sharon's family. And to Robert Elijah, a 19-year veteran of the PATH, who served as a track power railman, passed away sadly this morning. He was beloved by his colleagues and his family. We have nothing but condolences to Robert, who we got to know very well during our monthly meetings. On another note, we had the passing on April 9th of Michael Nestor, who was our former Inspector General, who had retired earlier in the year, who had a long battle with terminal illness. Michael passed away. Michael was an unbelievable colleague of ours, a friend of so many members of the Port Authority family. His 22 years of dedicated service epitomized his long and his esteemed career, including he had 27 years serving in high regard U.S. Customs Service. We want to thank Michael, his dedication, his legacy be left forever on a print at the Inspector General's office. He was one of the best. It is this time, Rick, that as you make the tours and you talk to the employees, and we have conversations, we're reaching out to the frontline employees. We have this conversation with them. There is nothing short of, I think the word is inspiring and inspirational. So we're randomly calling 20 or 25 employees a day. Rick is going out there and having these conversations and going and having these visits at these frontline operations. And the stories you hear, and with great pride, the employees talk about this is what their mission is, this is what they were called to do. It inspires all of us. And again, we can't thank our employees for providing everything to this agency, to this region, and to this Port Authority. The executive director alluded to help that we're going to be calling upon the federal government. We have had some success, and it's largely because of Rick and his senior staff working with the New York and New Jersey delegation, trying to make sure the people in Washington, D.C. understand how important this bi-state agency is. And we will be calling upon the New York and New Jersey congressional delegation again. Rick and I and a number of commissioners have reached out to the senators and the Congress members, and when you aggregate the political clout of those two delegations, it is substantial. And it is with that substantial clout that we are going to need them to move the needle. and you look at the other states that are going to be getting funded and agencies, there are 11 other states that have a budget that is actually less than the Port Authorities. Maine at $4 million, Wyoming $4 billion, Delaware $4.5 billion, Nebraska $4.9 billion, North Dakota $4.9 billion, South Dakota $4.9 billion, Montana $5.1 billion, Vermont $6 billion, New Hampshire $6 billion, Idaho $7.9 billion, Oklahoma $8.1 billion. The Port Authority has a budget of $8.3 billion and a capital plan of $3.6 to $3.7 billion a year. It is significant. It is larger than literally 11 other states in this country. The next federal funding, presumably the Menendez-Cassidy bill, smart bill, has to include the Port Authority for consideration. It must. The agencies, it does too much to keep this region going. When you look at the 140 million passengers that passed through our agency in 2018 through in aviation, the 7.4 million TEUs, which is equivalent to 85 million metric tons that were moved at the ports, the 122 million eastbound vehicle trips, 250 million round trips on our bridges and tunnels, and 82 million riders that we saw in 2019. That volume, that personnel, that commerce, that supply is so great, and it cries out for need and intervention from our federal delegation to make sure that we get the help and support that is so desperately needed to keep us moving forward and to keep our capital projects moving in the years to come. I do want to thank the New Jersey and New York congressional delegation. They have been phenomenal. They have been responsive. They have been receptive. And we look forward to working with them to try to close this loop and get the last bit of funding that we absolutely and desperately need. And that concludes my comments at this moment. In lieu of the speakers program of this virtual teleconference, written statements have been shared with the board earlier and will be filed with the transcripts of today's board meeting and posted on the Port Authority's website after the meeting. And I will point out that none of those comments as of the last few minutes, Peter, unless I'm correct, relate to any of the items on the board today. Correct? Correct. Alrighty now, we'll now proceed with the voting of the items for the board's consideration. Each of the respective committee chairs will provide a brief report prior to the matter being considered. As chair of the Committee on Operations, I will now present an item that would extend the contract with the Conduit State and Local Solutions in support of Port Authority's Easy Pass and Tolls by Mail operation that serve our bridges and tunnels facilities. The existing contract would be extended for a 2-year period. This extension would allow for the completion of the procurement and placement into service of placement contracts for the operation of the Easy Pass and Tolls by Mail, New York Customer Service Area. This active procurement is being jointly sponsored by the MTA Bridges and Tunnels and New York State Thruway Authority. The New York Customer Service Center is shared by the Port Authority and the Transportation Agencies. Prior to making a motion, I ask the Corporate Secretary to note any recusals.
There are no recusals.
Any commissioners have a comment or question on this item? Have a motion, please.
Motion to approve.
So moved.
I hear a second out there.
Second.
Okay.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Chairman O'Toole?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Linford?
Yes.
Commissioner Bagger?
Yes.
Commissioner Eve?
Yes.
Commissioner Horwitz?
Yes.
Commissioner LaBarbera?
Yes.
Commissioner McCabe?
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
Commissioner Pacino?
Yes.
Commissioner Rosado?
Yes.
Votes in order. The item is approved. Vice Chair Linford, as Chair of the Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management, will you now provide your report and the item for the board consideration?
Thank you, Chairman O'Toole. As Chair of the Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management, I will now report on an item under its purview. The item authorizes improvements through the World Trade Center Central Chiller Plant and River Water Pump Station to maintain a state of good repair, provide for permanent standby power, and provide for planning for future improvements. The estimated cost for this work is $9.3 million. Prior to making a motion on this item, I ask the Corporate Secretary to note any commissioner recusals on this matter.
There are no recusals on this matter.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, I now ask for a motion on this item.
So moved. So moved.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
I request the corporate secretary to call the roll for voting on this item.
Chairman O'Toole?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Linford?
Yes.
Commissioner Bagger?
Yes.
Commissioner Eve?
Yes.
Commissioner Horwitz?
Yes.
Commissioner LaBarbera?
Yes.
Commissioner McCabe?
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
Commissioner Pacino?
Yes.
Commissioner Rosado?
Yes.
As the votes are in order, the item is approved, and now I turn it back to Chairman O'Toole.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Bagger, as Chair of the Committee on Finance, will you now provide your report and the two items before the board for its consideration?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Chair of the Committee on Finance, I'm recommending two items that relate to purchasing insurance. The first item authorizes the renewal of owner-controlled insurance coverage for Port Authority construction projects. This is a vote for the Finance Committee only, as the responsibility for procurement of insurance has been delegated by the full committee, or the full board, to the committee. Prior to making a motion on this item, I'd ask the corporate secretary to note any commission refusals on this matter.
There are no recusals.
Any commissioners have any questions or comments? May I have a motion from a committee member?
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
And ask the corporate secretary to call the roll of the committee for voting on this item.
Commissioner Bagger?
Yes.
Commissioner Eve?
Yes.
Commissioner Horwitz?
Yes.
Commissioner McCabe?
Yes.
Commissioner Pacino?
Yes.
Great. As the votes are in order, that item is approved. The second item relating to insurance authorizes the renewal of property damage and loss of revenue insurance coverage for Port Authority assets. Coverage is placed under two separate programs, one covering the World Trade Center site and the other covering all other facilities of the Port Authority and its component units. Again, this is a vote for the Finance Committee. Prior to making a motion, to ask the corporate secretary to note any refusals.
There are no recusals.
Do we have any questions or comments? May I have a motion from a committee member?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. And request the corporate secretary to call the roll of the committee on this item.
Commissioner Bagger?
Yes.
Commissioner Eve?
Yes.
Commissioner Horwitz?
Yes.
Commissioner McCabe?
Yes.
Commissioner Pacino?
Yes.
As the votes are in order, that item is approved as well. And back to Chairman O'Toole.
Thank you, Commissioner Bagger. Before we adjourn, I'd like to turn back to our Executive Director, Rick Cotton.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to end the meeting on the same note that I began and which you spoke so eloquently about. The agency would not be able to do what it is doing without the commitment and dedication of the Port Authority staff and employees. And I think, again, we should end this meeting with expressions of thanks and gratitude and recognition for the individuals, the 8,000 individuals who are Port Authority staff and our contractors as well, for continuing to enable the agency to keep every single one of its facilities open and operating, and for their just extraordinary dedication. You used the word inspiring. I agree with that. Their extraordinary dedication and inspirational commitment to keep our facilities open, operating, and available to the public.
Thank you very much. There being no further business, I move to adjourn. May I have a second, please?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
This meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much. Everyone be safe out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
You as well. Take care, my fellow.